The small town of Pine Grove wasn't known for much. It had a main street with a coffee shop where the locals gathered each morning, a hardware store that had been run by the same family for 3 generations, and a cemetery on the edge of town that was as old as Pine Grove itself. Most days, life moved at the kind of slow, steady pace that made visitors from the city wonder how anyone could stand the quiet. But Pine Grove had something that big cities didn't, a mystery that had puzzled folks for nearly 70 years. It all started back in the 1950s, when old Mr. Reynolds was walking home late one rainy night. Taking a shortcut past the cemetery, he noticed something strange, a soft blue glow coming from between the gravestones. Being a practical man who didn't believe in ghost stories, he went to investigate. What he found was both beautiful and baffling. The marble tombstone of Elizabeth Wilson was giving off a gentle light, as if it had somehow trapped the moon inside its stone. The next morning, Mr. Reynolds told his story at the coffee shop, and, by noon, half the town had walked over to the cemetery to see for themselves. In the daylight, the tombstone looked ordinary enough, a simple slab of white marble with Elizabeth's name, the dates 1904-1923, and the words, "Beloved Daughter," carved beneath. There was no sign of the eerie glow Mr. Reynolds had described. Some folks laughed it off, saying the old man had probably had a drink too many at the tavern. Others wondered if he'd seen car headlights reflecting off the polished stone. But Mr. Reynolds stuck to his story, and when 3 nights later, after another rainfall, the night watchman reported seeing the same blue light, people started to take notice. Elizabeth Wilson's glowing tombstone quickly became part of Pine Grove's identity. On damp nights, especially in spring and fall, small groups would gather at the cemetery, hoping to witness the phenomenon. Children dared each other to touch the stone when it glowed. Teenagers used the spooky setting for dates, and every few years when news was slow, the local paper would run a story about the tomb that lights up the night, keeping the legend alive. Harold Baker had been the caretaker of Pine Grove Cemetery for over 30 years. A quiet man with weathered hands and eyes that had seen more than his fair share of grief, Harold took his job seriously. He mowed the lawns, trimmed around the headstones, and made sure the grounds were peaceful for those who came to remember their loved ones. He'd also become an unexpected expert on Elizabeth Wilson's tombstone. It's not every night, and it's not just when it rains, Harold explained to a reporter from a big city newspaper who had come to do a story on the glowing grave. But there's definitely a pattern. I've been keeping track in this notebook here. Harold showed the reporter a thick leather-bound journal filled with dates, weather conditions, and notes about the intensity of the glow. See here? March 12th. Light drizzle all day, temperature around 55 degrees. Strong blue glow lasting approximately 3 hours. And here, September 24th. Heavy rain in the morning, clear by afternoon. Faint glow visible from sunset until about midnight. The reporter looked impressed. "That's very scientific of you, Mr. Baker." Harold shrugged. "I'm just curious, is all. Been watching that stone for 30 years now, and I still can't figure out what makes it tick." Over the decades, various experts had come to examine the tombstone. University professors with fancy equipment, paranormal investigators with their gadgets, even a famous TV show about unsolved mysteries had featured Pine Grove's glowing grave. They all had theories. Phosphorescent minerals in the marble, some kind of chemical reaction with rainwater, even bioluminescent organisms living in the stone. But none of the explanations quite fit all the evidence. What made the mystery even more intriguing was that so little was known about Elizabeth Wilson herself. She had died young, just 19 years old, during a time when record-keeping wasn't what it is today. Her parents had passed away years ago, and she had no siblings. The only living relative anyone knew of was a second cousin who'd moved to California decades ago, and had never even visited the grave. The town librarian, May Chen, had become fascinated with Elizabeth's story. In her spare time, she dug through old newspapers, town records, and school yearbooks trying to piece together who this young woman had been. "I feel like I owe it to her," May told Harold one afternoon as they stood by the mysterious grave. "Everyone knows about her tombstone, but nobody really knows about her. It's like she's been reduced to this curiosity. What May had discovered so far painted a picture of a bright, ambitious young woman who stood out in her time. Elizabeth had been one of only 3 girls in her high school graduating class who went on to college. She had studied chemistry at a women's college in the next state, coming home to Pine Grove during breaks. "Look at this," May said, showing Harold a yellowed newspaper clipping. It was from the Pine Grove Gazette, dated 1922, showing a photo of a serious-looking young woman with a caption that read, "Local student Elizabeth Wilson wins Regional Science Prize for Innovative Research." She was smart, Harold said, studying the faded image. "You can see it in her eyes." "She was more than smart," May replied. "From what I can gather, she was brilliant. But then she died suddenly the next year, and her death certificate just lists unknown causes. Isn't that strange?" Harold nodded slowly. Back then, they didn't always know what killed people. Could have been anything. Influenza, appendicitis, any number of things. "Maybe," May said, not sounding convinced. "But I found something else interesting. Her father was a stonecutter who made headstones for the cemetery. He actually carved her tombstone himself." This bit of information gave Harold pause. So the man who made this mysterious stone knew more about it than anyone else? And he's been gone for, 60 years now? "At least," May confirmed. "Which means he took whatever secrets this stone holds to his grave." As interest in the glowing tombstone grew with each passing year, so did the legends surrounding it. Some said Elizabeth had been a witch who dabbled in magic. Others claimed she had been murdered, and her restless spirit was trying to communicate through the stone. The more dramatic version suggested the glow was a warning, or a portal to another world that opened on certain nights. Most of the townsfolk, though, had a simpler take. They saw the mysterious blue light as something special that made their little town unique. They were proud of their glowing grave, even if they couldn't explain it. For Harold, who had spent countless nights observing the phenomenon, the light had become almost like a friend. He would often sit on a bench nearby when the stone glowed, enjoying the peaceful blue radiance. Sometimes he would talk to Elizabeth, though he wasn't sure if he believed in ghosts. "Quite a stir you've caused, young lady," he would say with a gentle smile. "All these years and you're still the most interesting person in town." The mystery might have remained nothing more than a local legend if not for a chance encounter on a rainy Tuesday in April. Dr. Thomas Howard, a geochemist from the State University, had pulled into Pine Grove to get coffee on his way to a conference. Overhearing locals talking about the glowing tombstone, his scientific curiosity was piqued. "Is this for real or just a story you tell tourists?" he asked the waitress as she refilled his cup. "Oh, it's real all right," she assured him. "My grandpa used to take me to see it when I was little. If you're interested, you should talk to Harold over at the cemetery. He knows more about it than anyone." Dr. Howard hadn't planned on stopping in Pine Grove for more than 15 minutes, but something about the story caught his imagination. He decided a small detour wouldn't hurt. Little did he know, his impromptu visit would be the first step toward finally solving a mystery that had captivated the small town for 7 decades. The secret of the tomb that lights up the night. Harold Baker wasn't used to scientists who actually listened. Over the years, he'd met plenty of experts who came to Pine Grove with their minds already made up about what caused the glowing tombstone. They'd run their tests, nod knowingly, and leave with theories that never quite explained everything Harold had observed. But Dr. Thomas Howard was different. The geochemist sat on the cemetery bench, rain dripping from his coat, scribbling notes as Harold showed him the leather journal where he'd documented every instance of the glow for the past 30 years. "This is remarkable work, Mr. Baker," Dr. Howard said, genuine respect in his voice. "Most scientists wouldn't have such detailed observations." Harold shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise, just doing what anybody would do when faced with something they can't explain. Dr. Howard smiled. "Trust me, what you've done here is far from ordinary. These patterns you've noticed, the way the glow is stronger after certain types of rainfall, how it lasts longer in spring than summer, this is valuable data." The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy. According to Harold's records, conditions were perfect for the tombstone to glow that night. Would it be possible for me to take some very small samples? Dr. Howard asked. Tiny scrapings, from different parts of the stone and some soil from around the base? I have equipment in my car that might help us understand what's happening here. Harold hesitated. He felt protective of Elizabeth's grave like an unofficial guardian. Nothing that would damage the stone, he said finally, and nothing disrespectful. Absolutely, Dr. Howard agreed. The smallest samples possible and will disturb nothing. As the two men worked, May Chen arrived carrying a stack of old folders. She'd been at the county records office all morning, digging deeper into Elizabeth Wilson's story. You picked a good day to visit, she told Dr. Howard after introductions were made. If Harold's patterns hold true, you might see the glow tonight. I'm counting on it, the scientist replied. But I'm also intrigued by what you might have found. Sometimes the historical context is just as important as the physical evidence. May spread her documents on a dry spot on the bench. I've been tracing Elizabeth's family and her education. Her father, William Wilson, was more than just a stonecutter. He had quite a reputation throughout the region for his craftsmanship. She pointed to a faded advertisement from a 1920 newspaper. Wilson Memorials, where art meets remembrance. The heading read, above an illustration of an ornate tombstone. He specialized in custom work, often incorporating unusual elements into his designs, May continued. And there's something else interesting. Elizabeth wasn't just studying regular chemistry at college. According to these old course catalogs I found, she was specifically interested in photochemistry, the interaction between light and chemical substances. Dr. Howard looked up sharply from the tiny vial where he was storing a marble sample. Now that is fascinating. Father makes tombstones, daughter studies light-reactive chemicals. He let the thought hang in the air. Harold glanced between them. You think there's a connection, that somehow Elizabeth's studies and her father's work? It's too early to say, Dr. Howard cautioned, but it's certainly worth exploring. As the afternoon wore on, the three unlikely investigators continued their work. Dr. Howard examined his samples using portable scientific equipment from his car, occasionally muttering to himself or asking questions about the stone's history. May pored over her documents, piecing together Elizabeth's life story. Harold kept checking the sky, waiting for darkness to fall so they could see if the tombstone would perform its mysterious light show. Around 5 o'clock, just as the daylight began to fade, they were interrupted by the arrival of a dusty pickup truck. A tall, weathered man in his 60s climbed out, looking at them with suspicion. My grandson said there were people messing around with the Wilson grave, he said, his voice gruff. I'm Robert Taylor, head of the cemetery board. What's going on here? Harold quickly explained the situation, introducing Dr. Howard and May. Robert's expression softened slightly when he realized they weren't vandals, but he still looked concerned. That stone has been part of this town's story for generations, he said. We don't want anyone damaging it or, I don't know, explaining away the magic of it, I guess. I understand completely, Dr. Howard assured him. I'm not here to debunk anything. I'm just curious about the science behind something beautiful and unusual. Robert seemed to accept this. My grandmother knew Elizabeth, you know. They were in school together. This caught May's attention immediately. She did? Is your grandmother still kicking at 96, Robert said with a hint of pride. Lives with my sister now, over on Maple Street. Her mind wanders sometimes, but she has days where she remembers the past better than I remember last week. May and Dr. Howard exchanged glances. A living connection to Elizabeth Wilson was an unexpected gift. Do you think she'd be willing to talk to us? May asked. I've been researching Elizabeth's life, trying to understand who she was beyond just the mystery of her tombstone. Robert considered this. She doesn't get many visitors these days. Might do her good to have someone interested in her stories. He pulled out his phone. Let me call my sister. See if it's a good day for Grandma. Rose. 20 minutes later, the group was sitting in a cozy living room being served tea by Robert's sister, Linda. Grandma Rose was tiny in her armchair, wrapped in a hand-knitted shawl, but her eyes were bright and alert. Elizabeth Wilson, she said. the name clearly awakening old memories. Now there's a name I haven't heard spoken in quite some time. Yes, we were friends, though she was always much smarter than the rest of us. Always had her nose in a book or working on some experiment. What kind of experiments? Dr. Howard asked gently. Rose's eyes grew distant. All sorts of things. She was fascinated by materials that could capture light. I remember she once showed me a rock she'd treated with some solution she'd made. In the sunlight, it looked ordinary, but take it into a dark room, and it would glow the prettiest blue color you ever saw. She smiled at the memory. Elizabeth said someday we'd have streets lit up without electricity, just painted with her special formula. The visitors exchanged meaningful glances. This was the first real connection between Elizabeth's scientific work and something that could explain the glowing tombstone. Did she ever talk about her father's stone-cutting business? May asked. Rose nodded slowly. Oh yes, she spent many hours in his workshop. William was very supportive of her studies, unusual for those days. Most fathers didn't think girls needed much schooling, but he was different. He let her use part of his workshop for her experiments. I remember she was excited about some new project during her last break from college. Something about making her father's monument special, unique. Do you know how she died? Harold asked the question that had been puzzling him for years. Rose's face clouded. It was very sudden. Some kind of accident in her father's workshop, but people didn't talk about the details. It was considered inappropriate to discuss such things back then. All I know is that afterward, William was never the same. He became withdrawn, closed his business within a year. He spent months working on Elizabeth's tombstone alone, wouldn't let anyone see it until it was finished. As Rose spoke, the pieces were starting to come together. A brilliant young chemist experimenting with light-reactive materials, a father skilled at working with stone, a mysterious accident, followed by the creation of a unique tombstone that defied explanation. Dr. Howard leaned forward. Mrs. Taylor, this may sound like an odd question, but did Elizabeth ever mention working with phosphorescent compounds? Materials that absorb light and then release it slowly over time? Rose looked confused by the technical term. Then her face brightened. She called it captured sunshine. Said she was finding ways to make it last longer, glow brighter. The last time I saw her, she showed me a small marble chip that glowed for nearly an hour in the dark. She was so proud of it. Outside, the daylight had faded completely, replaced by the deep blue of early evening. Robert checked his watch. If you folks still want to see the stone tonight, we should probably head back to the cemetery. They thanked Rose for her memories, promising to return and share whatever they discovered. As they drove back to the cemetery, in separate cars, each was lost in thought, connecting the dots of the story that was emerging. At the cemetery, a small group of locals had already gathered near Elizabeth's grave. Word had spread that conditions were right for the stone to glow tonight, and several families with children were waiting excitedly, some with blankets and thermoses of hot chocolate. Harold led May and Dr. Howard through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces. As they reached the grave, Dr. Howard set up some equipment while May shared what they'd learned from Rose. So you're saying Elizabeth created some kind of glowing formula, and her father somehow incorporated it into her tombstone? Harold asked, trying to process the information. It's looking more and more likely, Dr. Howard replied. If she was experimenting with phosphorescent compounds and had found ways to make them more stable and longer lasting than what was typically available in the 1920s, and if her father had the means to incorporate these compounds into marble, it would be the perfect memorial, May finished softly. A grieving father using his daughter's own scientific discovery to create something that would keep her memory alive, literally shining through the darkness. As they talked, the first murmurs of excitement rippled through the crowd. A faint, blue glow was becoming visible on the surface of Elizabeth's tombstone. As they watched, it grew stronger, casting a gentle radiance that illuminated the surrounding graves with an otherworldly light. It's beautiful, Dr. Howard whispered, momentarily forgetting his scientific detachment. Harold nodded. It always is. But now, knowing the story behind it, it means something different. The glow wasn't just a scientific curiosity or a local legend anymore. It was a father's tribute to his daughter's brilliance, a light that had continued to shine long after both of them were gone. But the mystery wasn't completely solved yet. There were still questions about exactly what Elizabeth had discovered, how the formula had been applied to the stone, and why the glow followed the patterns Harold had documented over the years The crowd of onlookers marveled at the beautiful blue light. Dr. Howard turned to his new friends. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We've found the why, but we still need to understand the how." The blue glow from Elizabeth's tombstone cast long shadows across the cemetery as Dr. Howard carefully collected readings with his instruments. The crowd of locals had thinned out as the evening grew colder, but a few dedicated onlookers remained, including several children who gazed at the glowing stone with wide eyes. "It's like magic," whispered a little girl to her grandfather. "Sometimes science and magic aren't so different," the old man replied, smiling at her wonder. May stood nearby, thinking about Elizabeth, a young woman ahead of her time who never got to see the impact of her work. Harold kept a respectful distance, feeling like he was finally getting to know the person whose grave he'd tended for decades. "The intensity is strongest here," Dr. Howard said, pointing to areas around the carved lettering of Elizabeth's name. "And see how the glow is uneven? Some parts are brighter than others. That supports our theory that the compound was applied intentionally, not just mixed uniformly throughout the marble." "Can you tell what it's made of?" Harold asked. "Not precisely, not yet," Dr. Howard admitted. "But my equipment is detecting phosphorescent compounds similar to what would have been available in the 1920s, except modified somehow. The molecular structure seems more complex than what should have been possible with the chemistry of that era." Elizabeth must have been truly exceptional. As they worked, Robert Taylor approached with a thermos. "Thought you folks might appreciate some coffee. Looks like you'll be at this a while." They thanked him for the coffee, and Robert hesitated before speaking again. "After taking you to see Grandma Rose, I got to thinking. We might have some of William Wilson's papers in the Historical Society archives. Old blueprints, business records, that sort of thing. The society meets in the back room of the library. I have a key if you want to take a look." May's eyes lit up. "That would be incredible." "The stone isn't going anywhere," Harold said, looking at Dr. Howard. "And I've documented the glow enough times to know it'll last at least another few hours tonight." Dr. Howard packed up his equipment. "Lead the way." 20 minutes later, they were in a small, cluttered room at the back of Pine Grove's library. Decades of the town's history surrounded them. Old photographs, ledgers, farming equipment, and several filing cabinets filled with documents. "The Wilson materials should be in here somewhere," Robert said, pulling open a drawer. "We've been meaning to organize everything properly, but volunteers are hard to come by." They divided the cabinet drawers between them and began searching. The room was quiet except for the rustling of old paper and occasional murmurs when someone found something interesting but ultimately not related to their search. "Wait, I think I have something," May said after about half an hour. She was holding a folder labeled Wilson Memorials, Business Records 1915 to 1925. Inside were receipts, sketches of tombstone designs, and correspondence with suppliers of marble, and tools. Near the bottom of the stack, May found several pages of more personal notes written in a neat, precise hand. "These look like William's private thoughts about his work," she said, scanning the pages. "Listen to this. A monument should speak to who a person was in life, not just mark their absence. Stone endures, but memories fade unless we find ways to keep them alive." "That's beautiful," Harold said softly. "There's more," May continued, turning pages. "He writes about wanting to create memorials that would be meaningful to the families left behind, not just follow the standard designs everyone else used." Dr. Howard was examining a different folder containing what appeared to be technical drawings. "These are interesting. Look at these sketches. They show different methods for treating stone surfaces with various compounds. Wilson was experimenting with ways to make his monuments weather-resistant and more vibrant." Any mention of Elizabeth or her work? Harold asked, not directly, but Dr. Howard paused, studying a particular drawing more closely. This notation here mentions a special formula EW. Could that be Elizabeth Wilson? May moved to look over his shoulder. The date fits. This is from early 1923, just months before she died. They continued searching, and Robert pulled out another box from a high shelf. These haven't been properly sorted yet. Came from the old Wilson house when it was sold back in the 70s. Inside were personal items, photographs, notebooks, newspaper clippings about local events. At the bottom was a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This looks like a diary, Robert said, carefully opening it. He read the first page. Property of Elizabeth Wilson, 1922. This is her personal journal. The room fell silent as the weight of the discovery sank in. This wasn't just historical research anymore. This was a young woman's private thoughts, never meant to be read by strangers. Should we be looking at this? Harold asked, uncomfortable. May considered the question seriously. She's been gone for 100 years with no direct descendants. If her words could help solve the mystery she unintentionally created, I think that honors her memory rather than invading her privacy. But we should treat her words with respect. Robert nodded. I agree. And we're not looking for gossip or secrets, just understanding. He handed the journal to May, who gently turned the pages. Elizabeth's handwriting was small and precise, filling the pages with observations about her studies, daily life in Pine Grove, and her ambitions for the future. She writes a lot about her scientific work, May said. Detailed notes about experiments with phosphorescent materials. She was trying to create compounds that would absorb sunlight more efficiently and release it over much longer periods than was possible at the time. Dr. Howard leaned closer. Does she describe her methods? Some, May replied, still scanning the pages. She mentions combining traditional phosphorescent minerals with organic compounds derived from certain marine organisms, jellyfish and algae that naturally produce light. It was incredibly innovative for the 1920s. As May carefully turned more pages, her expression grew more serious. The later entries talk about her father's business struggling financially. The popularity of automobiles meant fewer people were buying ornate monuments. They'd moved away from their family plots and wanted simpler markers. That must have been hard on both of them, Harold said. A craftsman seeing less appreciation for his art and a daughter watching her father struggle. May nodded, turning another page. Here she writes about wanting to help him create something truly unique, something that would revitalize the business and combine her science with his craftsmanship. She continued reading, her voice growing softer. The last few entries describe her excitement about a breakthrough. She had created a formula that could be incorporated into marble during the finishing process, invisible in daylight but glowing blue in darkness. She planned to help her father develop a line of living memorials that would glow softly at night, symbolizing the enduring presence of loved ones. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Elizabeth's death. May read it aloud. Father is skeptical about the commercial possibilities, but excited about the science. Tomorrow we will test the formula on a larger piece of marble in his workshop. I've addressed the heat sensitivity issues, I believe, but will proceed with caution. If successful, this could transform how we remember those who have passed. A light in the darkness, a reminder that what we leave behind can still bring wonder to the world. Dr. Howard sat back, his face solemn. And then the accident happened. Something went wrong with the experiment. Her father must have been devastated, Harold said. Losing his daughter in an accident involving something they were working on together. And then, May continued, piecing it together, he channeled his grief into creating her tombstone, incorporating her own discovery into it, not as a commercial venture anymore, but as a tribute to her brilliance. Robert had been quiet, but now he spoke up. My grandmother said William Wilson shut down his business within a year after Elizabeth died. He completed only one more project after her tombstone, the angel statue on the Henderson family plot. Then he sold his equipment and rarely spoke to anyone in town again. "I know that statue," Harold said. "It's on the other side of the cemetery. Beautiful work, but I've never noticed it glowing." Dr. Howard looked thoughtful. He might have used a different formula, or maybe the composition of that stone was different. We should examine it too. As they carefully packed up the historical materials, each was lost in thought about the story that had emerged. A father and daughter united by creativity and innovation, a tragic accident, and a memorial that had kept both Elizabeth's memory and her scientific discovery alive for generations. Back at the cemetery, the glow from Elizabeth's tombstone had dimmed slightly, but was still visible in the darkness. A few curious teenagers had gathered taking photos with their phones. "It's strange," Dr. Howard said as they approached the stone. "We've essentially solved the mystery of how and why the tombstone glows. But instead of making it less magical, knowing the story behind, it makes it more meaningful." "That's often how it works with science," May replied. "Understanding doesn't diminish wonder, it deepens it." Harold nodded, looking at the gentle blue light emanating from the stone he'd watched over for so many years. "Now we know it's not just a curious phenomenon. It's a father's love for his daughter, a tribute to her mind and spirit." Dr. Howard set up his equipment again, preparing to take more detailed readings. There's still more to learn about exactly what Elizabeth discovered. From a scientific perspective, she was decades ahead of her time. With your permission, I'd like to analyze the formula properly, not to exploit it, but to document her achievement for the scientific record. She deserves recognition for her work. As the night deepened around them, the three continued their investigation, now with a new purpose. No longer just solving a local mystery, but uncovering a forgotten scientific breakthrough and honoring the brilliant young woman behind it. The tomb that lit up the night had a story to tell, one of innovation, tragedy, and a father's enduring love. And after nearly a century of silence, Elizabeth Wilson's light was finally being understood. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Pine Grove's only bed and breakfast as Dr. Howard reviewed his notes from the previous night. He'd stayed up until nearly 3 a.m, documenting the glowing tombstone's properties and analyzing the small samples he'd collected. What had started as a quick detour on his way to a conference had turned into something much more significant. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. May and Harold stood outside, carrying coffee and pastries from the local bakery. "We figured you might need breakfast," May said with a smile. "And we're eager to hear what you found after we left." They settled around the small table in Dr. Howard's room, spreading out their notes and materials. Harold placed Elizabeth's journal, which Robert had allowed them to borrow, carefully in the center. The glowing effect lasted until about 2 a.m., Dr. Howard began, sipping his coffee gratefully. "I took detailed spectroscopic readings throughout the night. The compound Elizabeth created is remarkable. It's similar to zinc sulfide phosphors that were known in the 1920s, but she modified it somehow. The decay rate, how quickly the glow fades, is much slower than anything that should have been possible with the science of her time." "Does that explain the pattern I've documented over the years?" Harold asked. "Why it only glows on certain nights and under certain conditions?" Dr. Howard nodded. "I believe so. The compound appears to be sensitive to specific environmental factors, primarily moisture and temperature. When rain seeps into the microscopic pores of the marble and interacts with the compound, it reactivates its ability to absorb and store light energy. That's why it glows after rainfall, but not every time it rains. The conditions have to be just right." May had been reading more of Elizabeth's journal. "That matches what she writes here. She mentions struggling with the compound's stability and sensitivity to humidity. She was working on making it more reliable and longer lasting." "The real question," Dr. Howard said, "is how William Wilson managed to incorporate the compound into the tombstone in a way that's lasted for 100 years. Most phosphorescent materials from that era would have degraded within decades." They spent the morning reviewing Elizabeth's notes and Dr. Howard's findings, piecing together the scientific puzzle. Around noon, Robert Taylor arrived with news. "I've been asking around town about the Wilson family," he said, settling into a chair. There's an old fellow, Joe Patterson, who used to work for Elizabeth's father as an apprentice stonemason. He's in his 90s now, lives with his daughter about 20 miles from here. She says he still has a clear mind and might remember something about William's workshop. That's incredible, Harold said. Should we go talk to him? His daughter says he'd welcome the company, Robert replied. She mentioned that he still talks about his time working with William Wilson, says it was the most interesting job he ever had. An hour later, they were seated in a sunny living room being served iced tea by Joe Patterson's daughter. The old man was thin but alert, his hands still showing the strength that had once carved stone. William Wilson, he said, the name clearly awakening old memories. Best stonemason in 3 counties. Taught me everything I know about working with marble. I started with him when I was just 16, a year before his daughter died. Did you know Elizabeth? May asked gently. Not well, Joe admitted. She was away at college most of the time I worked there. But I remember her visits home. Smart as a whip, that girl. She and her father would talk for hours about things I couldn't begin to understand. Chemistry and light and all sorts of scientific matters. Were you there when she died? Dr. Howard asked carefully. Joe's face grew solemn. No. It happened on a Sunday. I wasn't working that day. All I know is there was some kind of accident in the workshop. By the time I came in Monday morning, everything had changed. William was like a different person. Wouldn't talk, barely ate. He shut down most of the business, canceled orders, said he had only one project left that mattered. Elizabeth's tombstone, Harold said softly. Joe nodded. He worked on it day and night for weeks. Wouldn't let anyone help or even watch. Kept the workshop locked. I was just doing deliveries and cleanup by then. Did he ever mention what happened during the accident? Dr. Howard asked. Not directly, but once when he'd had a bit to drink. The only time I ever saw him touch alcohol. He said something that stuck with me. He said she found a way to capture light and it cost her everything. I didn't know what he meant at the time. Me showed him Elizabeth's journal. We found this. It seems she was developing a phosphorescent compound that could be incorporated into stone. Joe's eyes widened as he gently touched the journal. That explains something I've wondered about for 70 years. After William finished Elizabeth's tombstone, he had me deliver a small wooden box to a professor at her college. He said it contained Elizabeth's papers and her final discovery. Said the professor would know what to do with it. Do you remember the professor's name? Dr. Howard asked, suddenly alert. Joe closed his eyes, reaching back through decades of memories. Richards or Richardson, something like that. Chemistry department. Dr. Richard Richardson, May said, flipping through Elizabeth's journal. She mentions him here as her advisor and mentor. That university is still operating, Dr. Howard said. Their archives might have records of what happened to those materials. There's something else, Joe continued. After William finished Elizabeth Stone and that Henderson angel, he spent weeks destroying his notes and formulas. I asked him why, and he said some discoveries aren't meant for the world yet. Said Elizabeth's work was ahead of its time and could be dangerous in the wrong hands. This revelation cast a new shadow over their investigation. What had really happened in that workshop? What was in the compound that made William so determined to keep it secret? Mr. Patterson, Dr. Howard said, do you remember anything specific about how William prepared the marble for Elizabeth's tombstone? Any unusual techniques or materials? Joe thought for a moment. He ordered special marble from Italy, purer and more porous than what we typically used, and he built a new kind of kiln in the back of the workshop. Said he needed precise temperature control. I remember he mixed some kind of solution in glass containers that he wouldn't let me near. Said it was caustic, could burn skin. And the Henderson angel? Harold asked. We noticed it doesn't glow like Elizabeth's stone. That was different, Joe confirmed. William said the angel was cleansed, whatever that meant. He worked on it after finishing Elizabeth's stone, but his heart wasn't in it. It was his last commission, fulfilling a promise he'd made before everything happened. As they drove back to Pine Grove, the group was quiet, each processing what they'd learned. The scientific mystery was gradually giving way to a more human story of a father's grief, a daughter's brilliance, and a discovery that somehow led to tragedy. Back at the cemetery, they walked to the Henderson angel statue that Harold had mentioned. It was indeed beautiful. A life-sized angel with outstretched wings, carved from the same Italian marble as Elizabeth's tombstone. Dr. Howard examined it closely with his portable equipment. "There are traces of similar compounds," he said, after a while. "But they've been neutralized somehow, like William deliberately deactivated the phosphorescent properties. Maybe after what happened to Elizabeth, he decided the formula was too dangerous," May suggested. "Or too personal," Harold added. "Maybe he wanted Elizabeth's memorial to be unique, the only one of its kind." As the afternoon faded toward evening, they returned to Elizabeth's tombstone. In the daylight, it looked ordinary, just a simple, elegant slab of white marble. Hard to imagine it would transform into a beacon of blue light in a few hours. "I've been thinking," Dr. Howard said as they stood before the grave. "Given what we've learned, I'm not sure we should publish all the details of how the tombstone works. The scientific achievement deserves recognition, but if William went to such lengths to keep the formula private..." "I agree," May said. "We can document Elizabeth's contribution to phosphorescent chemistry without revealing the exact composition. Her story deserves to be told, but we should respect her father's wishes too." Harold nodded. "This town has protected the mystery of the glowing tombstone for generations. People come here to experience the wonder of it. Sometimes understanding how something works doesn't mean you have to explain away the magic." As the sun began to set, visitors started arriving at the cemetery, families and couples walking quietly among the graves, waiting for darkness to fall and the blue glow to appear. Word had spread about the investigation, and several people approached Harold with questions. "Will the stone stop glowing now that you know why it happens?" a worried child asked him. Harold smiled and knelt to the child's level. "No, the light will still shine. We've just learned the story behind it, which makes it even more special. It's not just a scientific curiosity, it's a father's tribute to his brilliant daughter." As darkness fell, the first hint of blue light began to emerge from Elizabeth's tombstone. Dr. Howard stood back, watching not the stone, but the faces of the people gathered around it, their expressions of wonder and delight as the glow strengthened. "Science doesn't diminish magic," he murmured to himself. "It just helps us appreciate the real magic, human ingenuity, love, and memory." The blue light spread, casting its gentle radiance across the cemetery, connecting the present to a past that was no longer quite so mysterious, but somehow even more remarkable. 2 weeks had passed since Dr. Howard's chance stop in Pine Grove. What had begun as a quick coffee break had turned into a scientific and historical adventure that changed the course of his work and brought new meaning to a small-town mystery. The university archives had proved to be a goldmine. After several phone calls and a visit from May, who had taken time off from her librarian job to help with the research, they located a dusty box labeled Richardson Estate, Chemistry Department Donation, 1956. Inside were notebooks, letters, and a sealed glass vial containing a small amount of pale blue powder, Elizabeth Wilson's final creation. Dr. Howard had carefully analyzed the powder using modern equipment at his university lab, taking every precaution given what they now suspected about the compound's potential dangers. His findings were both exciting and sobering. "It's unlike anything I've seen before," he explained to May and Harold during a video call. Elizabeth combined phosphorescent minerals with organic compounds in a way that was decades ahead of her time. The resulting material can store light energy for much longer than should be possible, and it reactivates when exposed to moisture at the right temperature. "Is it dangerous?" Harold asked, thinking of William Wilson's warning and Elizabeth's tragic death. Dr. Howard's expression grew serious. "In its pure form, yes. The chemical reaction that makes it glow also produces heat and, under certain conditions, can release toxic fumes. If she was working with a larger batch in a closed workshop testing heat applications to embed it in marble..." He didn't need to finish the thought. They all understood what likely happened. A brilliant young scientist, working without modern safety equipment, overcome by fumes from her own discovery. Her father must have realized what happened, May said softly. That's why he was so determined to both honor her work and keep the formula secret. Exactly, Dr. Howard agreed. The notes we found show that Professor Richardson understood the dangers too. He documented Elizabeth's work but never published it or attempted to recreate the formula. His notes mention waiting for proper safety protocols to be developed before pursuing further research. The university had been excited by their discovery of Elizabeth Wilson's pioneering work. Plans were underway to recognize her posthumously with an honorary degree and establish a scholarship in her name for women pursuing chemistry. Dr. Howard had written a careful paper documenting her scientific achievement without including the potentially dangerous details of the formula. Now, on a crisp autumn evening, the three unlikely friends were back in Pine Grove Cemetery for a special occasion. The town council, led by Robert Taylor, had organized a small ceremony to unveil a new informational plaque beside Elizabeth's glowing tombstone. A crowd had gathered, not just curious tourists, but locals who had grown up with the mystery of the glowing grave. Grandma Rose was there in her wheelchair, along with Joe Patterson, who had insisted on attending despite his age. Dr. Howard's colleagues from the university chemistry department stood chatting with Pine Grove residents, two worlds meeting over a shared appreciation for a long-forgotten scientist. As the sky darkened, Robert stepped forward to address the gathering. For generations, our town has been home to a beautiful mystery, a tombstone that glows in the dark. We've told stories about it, made up legends, brought our children to see it on rainy nights. But now, thanks to the dedication of three people who refused to let a mystery stay unsolved, we know the true story is far more remarkable than anything we imagined. He gestured to Harold, May, and Dr. Howard, who stood near Elizabeth's grave. I'd like to invite Dr. Thomas Howard to tell us what they discovered. Dr. Howard stepped forward, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention, but passionate about the subject. Thank you all for coming. What we found over these past weeks isn't just a scientific curiosity or a local legend. It's the story of a brilliant young woman whose work was decades ahead of her time, and a father whose love for his daughter created a lasting tribute that has captivated generations. He explained Elizabeth's research in simple terms that everyone could understand. How she had discovered a way to make materials store light and release it slowly over time. How she had dreamed of creating new ways to illuminate the world, and how her father had incorporated her discovery into her tombstone after her tragic death. Elizabeth Wilson deserves to be remembered not just for the beautiful phenomenon her work created, but as a pioneering scientist who pushed the boundaries of what was possible in her time. Her story reminds us that brilliant minds have always existed everywhere, not just in famous universities or big cities, but in small towns like Pine Grove. May spoke next, sharing what they had learned about Elizabeth's life and personality, from her journal and from talking with Rose and others who had family connections to her story. She was curious, dedicated, and determined to make her mark on the world. In her journal, she wrote about wanting to create practical magic, scientific discoveries so remarkable they would seem magical to most people. Harold, who had tended Elizabeth's grave for decades without knowing her story, spoke last. I've watched over this cemetery and this special tombstone for 30 years. I've seen thousands of people come to witness the blue glow, from skeptical scientists to wide-eyed children. I always felt there was something more to the story than just a strange natural phenomenon. Now I know I was right. Behind the glowing stone was a daughter's brilliance and a father's love. As darkness fell completely, the tombstone began to emit its now familiar blue glow, illuminating the faces of those gathered around it. Robert unveiled the new plaque, which bore a photograph of Elizabeth from her college days, a brief explanation of the scientific phenomenon, and the simple words, Elizabeth Wilson, 1904-1923, scientist, innovator, daughter of Pine Grove. Her light continues to shine. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared stories, Harold found himself standing beside Grandma Rose's wheelchair. both of them gazing at the glowing tombstone. "You know," Rose said, her voice thin but clear, "Elizabeth once told me she wanted to create something that would last, something people would remember her by. I wonder if she knows her wish came true." "I like to think she does," Harold replied. Across the cemetery, Dr. Howard was explaining the chemistry behind the glow to some fascinated local teenagers. One girl, about the same age Elizabeth had been, when she died, was asking particularly insightful questions. "Are you interested in chemistry?" Dr. Howard asked her. "I am now," she said, her eyes reflecting the blue light from the tombstone. "I never knew science could create something so beautiful." May overheard the exchange and smiled. Elizabeth's legacy was already at work, inspiring a new generation. As the evening wore on, people gradually departed, until only Harold, May, and Dr. Howard remained by the glowing tombstone. The mystery that had brought them together was solved, but the friendship forged through their investigation remained. "What happens now?" Harold asked. "Will the stone keep glowing forever?" "Not forever," Dr. Howard admitted. "The compound is slowly degrading. My calculations suggest the glow will become imperceptible within another 20 to 30 years. But considering it's already lasted a century, that's remarkable." "So future generations won't see it?" May asked, sounding sad. "They might not see the original glow," Dr. Howard said, "but they'll know the story. And with modern technology, we could create a safe version of Elizabeth's compound if the town wanted to preserve the effect. But there's something beautiful about its impermanence too. Like all remarkable things, it exists in a specific time and place." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the soft blue light that had mystified the town for generations. The true story behind the glow was now known, but somehow the knowledge had deepened rather than diminished its wonder. "I've been thinking," Harold said after a while. "All these years I've been documenting when the stone glows, the weather conditions, how long it lasts. I thought I was recording a scientific phenomenon, but now I realize I was really documenting the continuation of Elizabeth's work and her father's tribute. Each glow is like a conversation between them, still going on after all this time." May nodded. Some mysteries, even when solved, remain magical. As they finally turned to leave, Dr. Howard placed his hand briefly on the glowing stone. "Thank you, Elizabeth," he said softly. "Your light guided us to your story." The blue glow continued to shine behind them as they walked away, illuminating the night just as it had for 100 years. A father's love, a daughter's brilliance, and a small town's mystery, now part of a larger story that would be told for generations to come. The tomb that lit up the night had found its voice at last.